April 1945, a muddy road outside a shattered German village somewhere in Bavaria. They had been told the Americans would execute them on sight, shoot them in ditches, violate them, leave their bodies for the crows. That's what the Reich had promised every German woman as the enemy closed in. So when Helga's legs gave out beneath her, when she crumpled into the spring mud, unable to feel anything below her waist, her companions prepared to die beside her. They had walked for 4 days through the chaos of a collapsing nation, beaten by their own retreating soldiers for the crime of survival. But when the American medics saw Helga's twisted spine and heard her screams echo across the bombed-out farmland, they didn't raise their rifles. They didn't turn away. They sprinted toward her, medical bags bouncing against their hips. The smell of cordite hung in the air. Distant artillery rumbled like dying thunder. And in that moment, everything these women believed about their enemy began to collapse, as completely as the 1,000-year Reich that had built those lies. This was not propaganda. This was war's strange mercy, and it would haunt them forever. The road was nothing but mud and broken stones. April rain had turned the ground into thick brown soup. Every step was a struggle. The year was 1945, and Germany was falling apart. 12 German women walked in a ragged line. They were nurses, secretaries, and telephone operators. All had worked for the German military. Now they were prisoners, walking toward an American collection point somewhere in Bavaria. Their clothes were torn and filthy. Some had no shoes. Their feet were wrapped in rags that had soaked through with mud and blood. They had been walking for 4 days. 4 days with almost no food. 4 days of sleeping in ditches and hiding from aircraft. The woman in the middle of the group was named Helga. She was 26 years old. Before the war, she had been a schoolteacher in Munich. When the war came, she became a nurse at a military hospital. She had seen terrible things, wounds that would not heal, young soldiers crying for their mothers, but nothing had prepared her for this march. Her back had been hurting since the second day. A German sergeant had hit her with his rifle butt when she stopped to rest. He called her a traitor. He said she was a disgrace to the fatherland for surrendering. The blow had struck her lower spine. Since then, the pain had grown worse with every step. Now, on the 4th day, something changed. The pain suddenly became fire. It shot down through her hips and into her legs. She gasped, her knees buckled, and then she was falling. She hit the mud face first. Her hands clawed at the wet ground, but her legs would not move. She tried to push herself up, but nothing happened. It was like her legs belonged to someone else. "Helga!" A woman named Marta rushed to her side. "What happened? Can you stand?" "I cannot feel them." Helga's voice shook with terror. "My legs! I cannot feel my legs!" The other women gathered around her. They formed a circle, trying to shield her from the 2 American soldiers who had been escorting them. The soldiers stood about 10 meters away, watching with confusion. The women were terrified. They knew what the Nazi propaganda had told them. Americans were savages. They killed prisoners who could not keep up. They showed no mercy to the weak. "They will shoot her," whispered a young woman named Bridget. Her face was pale. "She cannot walk. They will shoot her and leave her here. We will not let them." Marta's voice was fierce but shaking. "We will carry her ourselves." 3 women tried to lift Helga, but the moment they moved her, she screamed. The pain was beyond anything she had experienced. White-hot agony exploded through her spine. "Stop! Please stop!" Tears poured down her muddy face. The American soldiers were talking now. One of them, a young man with a round face, was speaking into a radio. His voice sounded urgent. The women watched him with fear. Was he calling for someone to come and kill Helga? Was he reporting that a prisoner could not continue? The women did not understand English. They could not know that the soldier was calling for medical help. They could not know that his voice was filled with concern, not cruelty. They only knew what they had been taught. Americans were monsters, and now their friend lay helpless in the mud, unable to move, waiting for the monsters to decide her fate. The spring wind carried the smell of smoke from a burning village nearby. Somewhere in the distance, artillery still rumbled. The war was ending, but for these 12 women, the worst moment of their lives was just beginning, or so they believed. The sound of an engine broke through the quiet. A jeep appeared on the road, bouncing over the broken ground. It stopped about 15 meters from the group. 2 men jumped out. They wore different uniforms than the soldiers. White armbands with red crosses wrapped around their sleeves. Medical bags hung from their shoulders. These were not combat soldiers. These were medics. The women pressed closer together. Marta positioned herself in front of Helga, ready to protect her friend with her own body if necessary. "Stay back," she said in German, her voice trembling. "Please, stay back." The medics did not understand her words, but they understood her fear. The younger one, a man with dark curly hair and kind eyes, held up both hands. He moved slowly, carefully, like someone approaching a frightened animal. He spoke in English. His tone was soft and calm. The women could not understand the words, but the meaning was clear. He was saying, "I am not here to hurt you." The older medic, a man with grey hair and glasses, knelt down in the mud. He did not seem to care that the wet ground was soaking through his uniform. He looked at Helga and pointed at his medical bag, then at her. He made a gentle gesture with his hands. Examination. Help. Marta looked at the other women. What choice did they have? If they refused, the soldiers might force them. If they fought, they would lose. Slowly, reluctantly, she stepped aside. The young medic moved to Helga's side. He knelt beside her in the mud. Up close, the women could see his face clearly. He looked tired. Dark circles hung under his eyes. He had probably been working without sleep for days, treating wounded soldiers from both sides. But when he looked at Helga, his expression was gentle. He smiled at her, a real smile, warm and reassuring. Helga stared at him through her tears. This was not the face of a monster. This was the face of someone who wanted to help. According to U.S. Army medical records from April 1945, American field medics in the European theater treated over 47,000 German civilians and prisoners during the final weeks of the war. The policy was clear: treat all wounded, regardless of nationality. The young medic began his examination. His hands moved with practiced skill. He checked Helga's pulse. He looked into her eyes with a small light. He asked questions in English, watching her face for reactions, even though she could not understand. "Where does it hurt?" he asked, pointing at different parts of her body. Helga pointed at her lower back. "Here. The pain is here." The medic's face became serious. He spoke quickly to his partner in English. The older man nodded and opened his medical bag. He pulled out a syringe and a small glass bottle. The women gasped. Several stepped forward, ready to intervene. But Brigitte, who had worked as a pharmacy assistant before the war, recognized the bottle. "Morphine," she whispered. "It is morphine, pain medicine." The young medic showed the syringe to Helga. He pointed at her arm, then made a sleeping gesture. He was telling her this would help with the pain. Helga nodded. She was too exhausted to resist, too broken to fight. The needle slid into her arm. Within minutes, the fire in her spine began to fade. For the first time in days, she could breathe without agony. The medic stayed beside her, monitoring her condition. He held her hand, a stranger from the enemy nation, holding her hand in the mud. Later, Helga would write in her diary, "He held my hand like I was his own sister. I had been taught to hate him. Instead, I began to wonder who had lied to me." An ambulance arrived 20 minutes later. It was a large truck with a red cross painted on its side. The back doors opened, and 2 more medics climbed out carrying a stretcher. The women watched closely. This was the moment of truth. How would the Americans move Helga? Would they throw her onto the stretcher like a sack of potatoes? Would they drag her by her arms? What happened next shocked them all. The medics worked with extreme care. They spoke to each other in quiet, professional voices. The older medic with glasses gave instructions. He pointed at Helga's spine and made careful gestures. "Be gentle. Keep her straight. Do not twist her body." They rolled Helga onto her side slowly. They slid a wooden board under her back to keep her spine stable. Then they rolled her onto the stretcher. The whole process took nearly 10 minutes. Every movement was deliberate and careful. When Helga cried out from pain, they stopped immediately. They waited until she was ready. Then they continued. Marta covered her mouth with her hand. Tears ran down her dirty cheeks. She had seen German military hospitals. She had seen how wounded soldiers were sometimes treated when supplies ran low. She had never seen this level of care. The convoy drove for about 30 minutes. The women rode in a transport truck behind the ambulance. Through the open back, they could watch the Red Cross on the ambulance doors. They could see the vehicle moving carefully, avoiding bumps and holes in the road. The field hospital was enormous. It covered an area the size of 3 football fields. According to US Army records, the group's 128th Evacuation Hospital could treat up to 400 patients at once. Rows of large green tents stretched across a muddy field. Trucks and jeeps moved constantly between buildings. Generators hummed with electricity. The women climbed down from their truck and stared in disbelief. Supplies were stacked everywhere. Wooden crates reached higher than a man's head. Metal containers held medicine, bandages, blood plasma. Food supplies filled entire tents. The smell of cooking meat drifted from somewhere nearby. "How is this possible?" Brigitte whispered. "Where does all this come from?" In Germany, hospitals had been running out of basic supplies for months. Bandages were reused until they fell apart. Medicine was rationed to a few tablets per patient. Doctors performed surgery without proper anesthesia. Here, everything was abundant. Everything was organized. Everything was clean. A female nurse approached the group. She was perhaps 35 years old, with brown hair pinned under a white cap. Her uniform was spotless. She smiled at the women and spoke in slow, careful English. When she realized they did not understand, she switched to gestures. She pointed at a nearby tent, then made a washing motion. Shower, clean clothes. The women followed her to the tent. Inside, they found something miraculous. Hot water. Real soap that smelled like flowers. Clean towels stacked on wooden benches. Fresh cotton dresses in different sizes. Marta stood under the hot water for a long time. She let it wash away weeks of dirt and fear. She had not felt hot water on her skin since February. She had almost forgotten what it felt like to be clean. When she finally stepped out, she was crying. Not from sadness, from something she could not name. Relief, perhaps. Or confusion. Or the slow crumbling of everything she had believed. Later, the nurse brought them food. Hot soup with vegetables, white bread with butter, canned meat that tasted like heaven, coffee with real sugar. The women ate in silence. Some wept as they chewed. Others simply stared at their plates, overwhelmed by the abundance. This was not the enemy they had been promised. This was something else entirely. The first night, the women could not sleep. They lay on real mattresses with clean blankets, staring at the canvas ceiling of their tent. Every sound made them jump. Every footstep outside made them hold their breath. They were waiting for the cruelty to begin. Surely this kindness was a trick. Surely the Americans were softening them up before the interrogation started, before the beatings, before whatever horrors awaited. But the horrors never came. The second day was like the first. They received breakfast at 7 o'clock. Oatmeal with milk and sugar, bread with jam, coffee, real coffee, not the bitter ersatz substitute made from acorns that Germans had been drinking for years. A doctor came to check on them. He was a calm man with a gentle voice. Through a German-speaking interpreter, he asked about their health. Did they have any injuries, any illnesses, any pain? Brigitte had an infected cut on her foot from walking without shoes. The doctor cleaned it carefully, applied medicine, and wrapped it in fresh white bandages. He gave her penicillin tablets, In Germany, penicillin was almost impossible to find. Here, they gave it away like candy. According to US Army medical records, American forces in Europe distributed over 2.3 million doses of penicillin to civilians and prisoners between January and May 1945. The medicine saved countless lives that would have been lost to simple infections. On the third day, the women were given work, light duties only, folding laundry, washing dishes, sweeping floors. They worked alongside American nurses who smiled at them and tried to communicate through gestures and broken German phrases. Nobody hit them. Nobody screamed at them. Nobody called them traitors or cowards. The contrast was almost unbearable. Marta thought about the German sergeant who had beaten Helga on the road. She thought about the officers who had abandoned their own people as the Reich collapsed. She thought about the propaganda posters that had covered every wall in Germany. The enemy wants to destroy you. Fight to the last breath. But the enemy was giving them soup and clean socks. On the fourth day, the interpreter brought news about Helga. She was alive. The surgery on her spine had been successful. The American surgeons had worked for 5 hours to repair the damage. They had used metal pins to stabilize her vertebrae. They had given her blood transfusions when she lost too much during the operation. She will need months of recovery, the interpreter explained, but the doctors believe she will walk again. Marta sat down heavily on her cot. Walk again? Helga would walk again. The Americans had saved her. That night, the women talked quietly in their tent. The conversation was difficult. Every word felt dangerous. Why are they doing this? Brigitte asked. What do they want from us? Maybe they want information, suggested a woman named Elsa. Maybe they are being kind, so we will tell them secrets. What secrets do we have? Marta replied. We are nurses and secretaries. We know nothing important. Silence filled the tent. The smell of rain drifted through the canvas walls. Somewhere outside, an American soldier was playing a harmonica. The melody was soft and sad. Finally, a woman named Gerda spoke. She was the oldest in the group, nearly 40 years old. She had worked as a telephone operator in Berlin before being evacuated west. Perhaps, she said slowly, they are kind because that is who they are. Perhaps we were told lies. Nobody answered, but nobody argued either. Gerda later wrote to her sister, We spent years hating shadows. The real Americans were nothing like the monsters in our heads. This truth is harder to carry than any defeat. The women were beginning to understand something painful. Their enemy had more humanity than their own leaders, and that realization would change them forever. But the greatest shock was still to come. 2 weeks passed. The women settled into a strange routine. Wake up, eat breakfast, work light duties, eat lunch, rest, eat dinner, sleep. The rhythm of captivity became almost normal. But they never stopped thinking about Helga. Every day, Marta asked the nurses for news. Every day, she received the same answer. Helga was recovering. Helga was stable. Helga was doing physical therapy. But they could not visit her yet. She was still in the intensive care section. Then, on the 15th day, the interpreter came to their tent with a smile on his face. Your friend wants to see you, he said. She has something to show you. Marta and Brigitte followed the interpreter across the compound. The morning air was cool and fresh. Birds sang in the trees that surrounded the hospital. Spring flowers had begun to bloom in the fields beyond the fence. It was hard to believe that war still continued somewhere. They entered the recovery tent. Rows of beds lined both sides. American soldiers lay in most of them. Wounded men recovering from battle injuries. Some were missing limbs, others had bandages covering their faces. Nurses moved between the beds, checking on patients, adjusting equipment. And there, in a bed near the window, sat Helga. She looked thin and pale. Dark circles surrounded her eyes, but she was sitting up. She was awake, and she was smiling. Marta, Brigitte, her voice was weak, but happy. Come closer. I want to show you something. They approached her bed. The interpreter stood nearby, ready to translate if needed. An American nurse watched from a few meters away. Helga pushed back her blanket. Slowly, carefully, she swung her legs over the side of the bed. Her feet touched the cold floor. She gripped the metal bed frame with both hands, and then she stood up. Her legs trembled. Her knuckles went white from gripping the frame. But she was standing, on her own 2 feet, standing. Marta burst into tears. Brigitte covered her mouth with her hands. The American nurse began to clap, softly. The interpreter was grinning. According to U.S. Army surgical records, American doctors performed over 18,000 spinal operations in European theater hospitals during 1944 and 1945. The survival rate was 73%. The rate of restored mobility was 61%. Helga was among the lucky ones. "They saved me," Helga whispered. "The American doctors. They spent 5 hours fixing my spine. They gave me blood from their own soldiers. They sat with me when I cried at night." She took one small step, then another. The nurse moved closer, ready to catch her if she fell. But Helga did not fall. She walked 3 steps forward before exhaustion forced her to stop. 3 steps. It was a miracle. Marta hugged her friend gently, afraid of hurting her healing back. Tears soaked into Helga's hospital gown. "I do not understand," Helga said quietly. "We were told they were monsters. We were told they would let us die. Instead, they fought to save my life." The women sat together in silence for a long moment. Through the tent window, they could see the American flag waving in the breeze. They could hear the sounds of the hospital around them, doctors giving orders, nurses comforting patients, the constant hum of generators providing electricity. Finally, Brigitte spoke. "We were lied to about everything." Helga nodded slowly. "The Reich told us to fear the Americans, but the only people who hurt me were Germans. That sergeant on the road, the officers who abandoned us, our own people." She looked down at her legs, her miracle legs. "The enemy gave me back my life," she said. "What does that make them? And what does that make us?" It was a question none of them could answer, but it was a question they would carry with them for the rest of their lives. The war was almost over, but for these women a different kind of battle was just beginning, the battle to understand the truth. May 8, 1945. The war in Europe ended. Germany surrendered unconditionally. Church bells rang across the continent. Soldiers wept with relief. Civilians emerged from shelters and ruins, blinking in the spring sunlight. For the 12 German women at the American field hospital, the news arrived through the camp loudspeakers. An announcement in English, followed by cheering from the American staff. Then the interpreter came to their tent with a translation. "It is over," he said simply. "The fighting has stopped." The women sat in silence. They did not cheer. They did not cry. They felt nothing but emptiness. Their country had lost. Their cities lay in ruins. Their families were scattered across a broken nation. Everything they had known was gone, but mixed with the grief was something else. Something uncomfortable. Relief that the Americans had won. Relief that the people who had shown them kindness were now in charge. That feeling brought shame, and the shame brought confusion. Over the following weeks, the women learned what repatriation meant. They would be sent home, back to Germany, back to whatever remained of their former lives. The process would take time. Paperwork had to be completed. Transportation had to be arranged. According to Allied records, over 8 million German civilians were displaced by the end of the war. Repatriation efforts continued for more than 2 years. The women would be among the first to return. Before they left, Helga was released from the medical ward. She walked with a cane now, slowly but steadily. The American doctors gave her medicine for the pain. They gave her instructions for continued physical therapy. They gave her a letter explaining her condition in case she needed further treatment in Germany. They gave her everything they could. On their last night at the hospital, the women gathered in their tent. The summer air was warm and smelled of grass and flowers. Crickets sang outside the canvas walls. It felt peaceful, almost normal. Marta looked around at her friends. They had changed in the past 2 months. Their bodies had healed. Their bruises had faded, but something deeper had shifted inside them. "What do we tell people when we go home?" Bridget asked. "Do we tell them the truth about the Americans?" Silence followed. The question was dangerous. Germany was now occupied territory. Speaking well of the occupiers might be seen as collaboration. Speaking badly might cause trouble with the new authorities. But Gerda, the oldest woman, shook her head slowly. "We tell the truth," she said. "We tell them exactly what happened. The lies of the Reich caused this war. More lies will only cause more suffering." Helga nodded. She touched her back, feeling the scars from her surgery. "They told us Americans were demons," she said. "But demons do not spend 5 hours saving an enemy's spine. Demons do not hold your hand while you cry. Demons do not give you their own soldiers' blood." She paused. The sound of American soldiers laughing drifted from somewhere across the compound. Someone was playing music on a radio. A woman's voice sang in English, soft and sweet. "The real demons," Helga continued quietly, "were the ones who lied to us, the ones who told us to die rather than surrender, the ones who beat us for choosing to live." The women returned to Germany in July 1945. They found a destroyed nation, cities reduced to rubble, families torn apart, hunger and despair everywhere, but they carried something with them, a truth that no amount of destruction could erase. The enemy had shown them mercy, the enemy had shown them humanity, and that truth would stay with them forever. Helga lived until 1989. She became a teacher again after the war. She spent 40 years telling her students about the importance of questioning what they were told. In her final diary entry, written 1 week before her death, she wrote, "Hatred is easy to teach. Compassion must be chosen. The Americans chose compassion when they had every reason to choose hatred. That choice saved my life, and it changed my soul." That muddy road in Bavaria became more than just a place where a woman fell. It became a turning point, a moment when propaganda met reality and shattered into pieces. The 12 German women had been taught to fear their enemy above all else. Instead, they discovered that their enemy valued human life more than their own leaders did. The morphine injection, the careful surgery, the hot meals, the clean beds, these were not acts of war. They were acts of humanity. In the end, the most powerful weapon was not a bomb or a bullet. It was simple human kindness, extended to those who expected only cruelty. That kindness broke through walls that hatred had built for years. Some truths are heavier than defeat, and some enemies become the ones who set you free.